So we're back. This is week 1. I hope you had a good experience reading chapters 1 through 15. As you may have seen in the video we did earlier this week, I asked a question about who are the Epicureans. We now have the answer. Ryan.
Yeah, the Epicureans were a philosophical group. It was a belief system that was anti-spiritual, essentially, to really water it down. All that we have is this physical body and the physical world. There is nothing kind of further to attain, and so you make the most of this moment. Make the most of the pleasure that we can experience, essentially a form of hedonism in one sense.
And it's like hardly anyone thinks that way today, right?
Yeah,
it's
eat, drink, be merry.
It's
you're not accountable to anybody. I don't
just
think
a
I've
bunch of
heard that
particles.
ever.
Just a bunch of particles. So
Yeah, they have a big thing with atoms.
yes, it really is something very relevant to today. Is the point. So when I got into 1 through 15, actually through the rest of the book, Athanasius, he's a writer. He makes a conscious decision to describe Jesus Christ as the Word, and yes. I know that comes from the John. But what do you think he was intending with that?
He's making a distinction. He's working through this kind of theology and this understanding that we have that Jesus is co-eternal with the Father. There was never a time where the Father was and the Son was not. And so rather than simply referring to him as the Son, in the beginning was the Word and the Word was with God, I think he's intentionally leading into, because from those first early pages on the Incarnation, he is going to start in Genesis, and he is reflecting backwards what we take from John, where in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and there was never a time where he was not. And so he's really wanting to bring forward that emphasis, because we so predominantly go to saying Jesus.
Right.
Because once he took on flesh, he was a person who had a name, Jesus of Nazareth.
Yes.
And so this is, I think, Athanasius' way of distinguishing and speaking in two different ways about the same person, but in the pre-incarnational form and the post-incarnational form.
That makes sense. And the Logos, right?
Yes, Logos
the original
is the
word.
Greek word for word.
I've often thought, in the beginning, God said, "Let there be." He said something, right?
Words.
So it's a creative force, which is fascinating. So it's really, he's bringing us really into the reality that he is the creator. That he didn't just start suddenly on the day he was born. He was always with us.
Yes. Every heresy that exists either stems from not understanding Jesus to be fully God, or not understanding him to be also fully human.
So which team are you on?
Both. Yeah.
So the other thing I was struck, so obviously, I was thinking this being Advent reading, because, before Christmas, before the birth of Christ, and a lot of emphasis.
And waiting,
but emphasis in this book on death of our bodies, the corruption of our bodies, it's in a book on the birth of Christ. And how God's judgment that we must die then creates a dilemma. So can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's foundational to, our whole theology. And again, I think we take for granted today some of these concepts, because, we are in a church that is 2,000 years old. And when Athanasius is writing this, in the early to mid 4th century, a lot of these ideas were still in the process of being worked out, and so it's really important that he starts there, and that this idea is at the foundation, because God created humanity for life, to be with him, to walk with him, because he is the source of life. We are created in his image and meant to reflect that life that he has in himself.
Yeah.
And so when we looked and we saw and we took for ourselves out of the desire to be equal to God,
Yes.
that fracturing cannot be anything other than death. And we can refer to sin or corruption or depravity. These are really just all other ways of referring to death. Lying is a death of truth. Pride is a death of humility. These are just, death has seeped its way into every aspect of human existence. And this is really what Athanasius is trying to really settle in the first few pages, is getting across. And I think that makes us uncomfortable, especially today, where we have funeral homes, we have long-term care homes. We try and put death away from us as much as we can. It makes us uncomfortable, and it should. It should make us uncomfortable. We were not made for death.
Look at the original Eden context. It's the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and there's a tree of life. And we were not intended to die. Yeah. But because we chose to believe.
And it's not that God will ever wanted to keep wisdom and knowledge from us either. In time, God intended to grow when we were mature enough in his timing and by his leading. He would lead us into full wisdom. Right? Because the garden was good, it wasn't perfect.
And John Walton talks in his books about the Eden story. Is the whole thing is about that. It's about wisdom that we chose to learn on our own. We didn't trust God to teach us. That we didn't trust God at all. We trusted something else, and then we lost our access to the tree of life.
Yep.
So
as a grace, God protected us by removing us from the tree of life.
Oh, that's interesting.
If we had eaten from the tree of life after having consumed from the tree that we were not supposed to, we would have been eternally damned.
That's interesting.
And that is essentially what Athanasius is arguing for.
There we go. So last question for this week. There's so much more we can get into, I'm sure. And I'm sorry to cut it short, but in terms of the sections, there's obviously a structure. Whenever an author sits down to write a book, he or she's going to think through the order of things. So can you walk through that very quickly, just sort of these different sections and what he was trying to accomplish?
Yeah. We begin with that dilemma, what he calls the divine dilemma, or what an editor has called the divine dilemma, where...
Yeah, authors don't do the titles, just so you know.
Yeah, in the original Greek, there's probably no subtitles.
Yes.
What's happening is that we have to start at the beginning. And so that's what Athanasius chooses to do. He sets up God's intention for creation, God's involvement in creation, that God is not an uninvolved God, but also really, again, setting against other theologies like Gnosticism or things like that, really trying to articulate that both the physical world and God in the spiritual world are both good and created by God. So one is not higher in elevation or importance than the others. And so he's going through and setting the groundwork for what happened. Why was there even a need for Christ to come in the first place? Human will, human choice, setting that groundwork for our, choosing death and depravity and eating death unto ourselves, separating ourselels from God. And then, this dilemma again goes further. So once humans had sinned, what is God to do? And you'll notice that in the first, 20 chapters or so, he's really driving on this, and it kind of weaves its way throughout the book.
Okay. Yeah.
God being good, what was he to do? Because God is inherently good, he was
not doing nothing.
He cannot be untrue to himself, right?
Yeah.
As Exodus 34:6 says, God is gracious, compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in loyal love and faithfulness.
Yeah.
He cannot be anything other than that.
Yes.
And so once he had set the standard, he had to follow through with it, but he had created humanity. If he destroyed humanity and started over, did that diminish him?
Yeah.
And so in the first, 20 or so chapters, he's really working through these kinds of dilemmas. I split up that divine dilemma just to really kind of balance the 4 weeks.
I asked him to split up into 4, so he had to cut it somewhere.
So, but it's good because it really does, it really sets you up to kind of work through some stuff and then eases you into that second section, which is like, why then did Christ have to come? Why did he have to be incarnate? Why take on flesh?
Yeah.
Why? Because through a human being, death entered the world. It was only through a human being that death could be consumed and defeated. But no human was capable. And so only God was capable of actually consuming that, so he needed to do it, and then needed to do it a certain way. And so Athanasius works through that about the kind of death that Jesus had to have. And then kind of in this latter half of the book, he gets into refuting claims from the Jewish camp. And why is it that Jewish people have not accepted Jesus to be the Messiah? And then again reiterates kind of some of what that first work was about, and against the Gentiles, and really what is that the Gentiles are suggesting, and why are they false in their understanding that that Jesus it was demeaning of God to have taken on flesh. Yeah. And then he ends the book, and he ends with this awesome phrase that Jesus became human that we might become gods.
Well, on that note, I think we've hit our point for stopping there this week. We look forward to you being with us next week. And again, I hope you are finding this reading series as illuminating as I have.